Good morning and welcome to another day in the market. Machines will be looking at ServiceNow, PayPal, Amgen, Boeing, Facebook and Qualcomm today. Plenty of other excellent companies like Alphabet also announced, but we want to keep it short for now.
ServiceNow announced results on April 27, 2022. Interesting facts picked up from the call. When the cohort renews, though in Q4, those headwinds list aside, and we expect CRPO growth to re-accelerate quarter over quarter, we expect an operating margin of 22%, which reflects the timing of marketing spend that shifted from Q1 into Q2 and some incremental FX. We expect 203 million diluted weighted outstanding shares for the quarter. And incidentally, if you're interested, we've done more than 100 deals right now on ServiceNow Impact, and what we're seeing is user adoption is speeding up, values being accelerated, and customer net promoter and satisfaction is going through the moon, and as Gina said, the retention rates prove that the best in the business. We are raising the midpoint of our subscription revenue outlook by 23 million to more than offset the incremental 20 million headwind we're seeing from FX, resulting in a net increase of 3 million. Here are some of the questions that were asked during the earnings call, to have a better idea of the discussions that were happening. 1. Is there any geographic differences, like are you seeing any difference in sort of behavior in Europe versus behavior in the US or Asia Pac, or is it pretty much consistent across the board? My question is, what has changed about the go-to-market such that you're able to bridge the gap across so many different departments and find relevance for your solutions? So does that mean that the 28% cut in 2Q would be maybe 29%, 30% normalized, and then in 3Q, do you get another 1 to 2 point headwind before you get that acceleration in 4Q? But how are you just kind of threading that line between the price increases on existing products versus the new products that you're delivering, and making sure that customers are able to take on the scope of new products where you guys are really innovating on? Last, we used sentiment analysis to see how the analyst call sounded about specific topics. About investments, sentiment was about 60% positive. About growth, sentiment was about 71% positive.
PayPal announced results on April 27, 2022. Interesting facts picked up from the call. We did 3.6 billion in volume in Q1, up 256%, with over 18 million consumer accounts choosing this funding option since launch, and we are seeing increased merchant penetration and upstream presentment, which will allow us to continue to deliver strong results in Q1. Braintree outperformed again with volumes growing 61%. If it's in store, they want to use a form factor they're familiar with, they can do that, but it ties completely into the app, fully integrated, a little like the Venmo credit card is into the. We just launched this 3% cash back on any purchase on PayPal, 2% everywhere else, but it is a fully integrated experience. And so you'll recall, and Dan also referred to this in his prepared remarks, that at the last quarter, when we gave a revenue range of 15% to 17%, we very clearly said if things did not improve, we would be at the low end of that range. As a result, customers who use our digital wallet transact 25% more at checkout than users that are not using the app, and over 70% of our buy now pay later users engage through our digital wallet. Here are some of the questions that were asked during the earnings call, to have a better idea of the discussions that were happening. What, in your view, are the top 3 or 4 things that PayPal really needs to do differently going forward to turn around the trajectory of the business? And so as you're thinking about kind of what does that medium term look like? Is the Ukraine situation bleeding into other parts of Europe? Could you talk a little bit about some of the benefits of PayPal scale that may create barriers to entry among new entrants, and where you're most focused as it relates to competition, if not necessarily new competitors? Can you update us on how PayPal is positioned in unified commerce? Last, we used sentiment analysis to see how the analyst call sounded about specific topics. About sales, the sentiment was 50% positive. About spending, the sentiment was 67% positive. About growth, the sentiment was 65% positive. About outlook, the sentiment was 50% positive.
Amgen announced results on March 30, 2022. Interesting facts picked up from the call. First, 1.5 billion recorded in acquired in-process R&D associated with the 5' acquisition in Q 2021, and second, $400 million recorded in research and development related to an upfront payment to license rights to AMG 451 from Kyoker Incorporation in Q3 2021. Important additional points to consider for the remainder of 2022: foreign exchange had an adverse impact on our Q1 2022 sales, and based on current rates, it is expected to create headwinds to our reported product sales of approximately $400 million year over year, and has been included in our guidance. Second, investing in our business through capital expenditures, including for our new environmentally friendly facilities under construction in Ohio and North Carolina, and third, returning capital to shareholders through growing dividends, including $1.94 per share in the quarter, representing a 10% increase from Q4 2021, and 4 opportunistic share repurchases, including 24.6 million shares of common stock in the first quarter, which included 23.3 million initial shares received and retired under the accelerated stock buyback agreement. We initiated 2 additional studies with Tespire and severe asthma: the Wayfinder Phase 3b study designed to demonstrate a reduction in oral corticosteroid use in adult participants on long-term oral corticosteroid therapy, and the Passage Phase 4 real-world effectiveness study designed to evaluate Tespire in adult and adolescent participants, including underrepresented populations such as Black Americans, smokers, and patients with asthma. Also in the lung cancer setting, we have submitted updated Phase 1 data of tarlatamab, our DLL3 targeting half-life extended BiTE molecule being used in patients with relapsed refractory small cell lung cancer, to a medical congress taking place in the late summer, and we plan to initiate Delphi 303, a Phase 1b study testing tarlatamab in combination with standard of care and first-line small cell lung cancer this quarter. Here are some of the questions that were asked during the earnings call, to have a better idea of the discussions that were happening. Can you just talk about your strategy in cardiovascular disease and what are the large opportunities there? What steps can you take to ensure that G12C status is recognized by physicians to drive prescriptions here? And is there any expected change to pricing that would be enacted if the lower dose is seen as equivalent? Any updated thoughts in terms of how that's going or your expectations on specifically Humira for 2023 versus 2024? Is that relating to the ongoing litigation with the IRS, or is that for a different reason? Last, we used sentiment analysis to see how the analyst call sounded about specific topics. About sales, the sentiment is 59% negative. About growth, the sentiment is 90% negative. About outlook, the sentiment is 67% negative.
Boeing announced results on April 27, 2022. Interesting facts picked up from the call. 1Q certainly had a few challenges to navigate: the warranty crane, the updated regulatory requirements on our commercial airplane programs, as well as a combination of COVID supply chain constraints, inflation impacting, in particular, the fixed price defense development programs. The commercial passenger market recovery expectations are largely unchanged from what I shared last quarter, even as we saw some events that added near-term pressure, including reduced passenger traffic in and around Russia. Global flight ops at about 75% of 2019 levels. We've applied all the lessons from the 787 search, which, of course, we have just submitted, and believe that we've got to give ourselves the time and freedom to get this right with the FAA and give everybody the time they need to give us the cert. Here are some of the questions that were asked during the earnings call, to have a better idea of the discussions that were happening. So can you give us more specific detail on what the regulators and counterparties are still looking for, what specifically you need to do to satisfy their questions and process? I mean, are you willing to take on additional leverage at this point, or would you look to potentially an equity raise? And like the other stored aircraft, when we think about MAX, should we think about most of these aircraft will be delivered through 2023, or does it stretch out beyond that? Last, we used sentiment analysis to see how the analyst call sounded about specific topics. About investments, the sentiment was 50% positive. About costs, the sentiment was 83% negative. About outlook, the sentiment was 50% positive.
Meta announced results on April 27, 2022. Interesting facts picked up from the call. And if you think about just a bit of context, that may be useful on why we've ramped expenses so much, as especially with the success that we've seen with Quest 2, we're now basically funding product teams to be building our future products 2 or 3 versions into the future. As he described, it's focused on 3 main areas: 1, growing video monetization, especially short-form video like Reels; 2, evolving our ad systems to do more with less data; and 3, investing in AI and machine learning to support our ads infrastructure. We estimate that approximately 2.9 billion people use at least one of our family of apps on a daily basis in March, and that approximately 3.6 billion people used at least one on a monthly basis. More specifically, ATP continues to be a headwind, but we're also seeing incremental headwinds from iOS 15 and other regulatory changes. Here are some of the questions that were asked during the earnings call, to have a better idea of the discussions that were happening. Can you talk to us a little bit about what you're seeing on total time spent on both core Facebook as well as Instagram in the US, as you're seeing this really strong Reels engagement moving through the overall user base? The first, just on the strength that you saw over in kind of APEC and rest of the world, can you share some color? So can you give us an update on how close you are closing the gap on measurement from where you were before and then targeting what you said as a longer term issue? My question is, given the size of Facebook and all the first party data that you have, how do you think some of these new techniques are going to perform relative to the rest of the industry and when you expect them to kind of show up in a more meaningful revenue way? Can you talk to us a little bit about what you're seeing on total time spent on both core Facebook as well as Instagram in the US as you're seeing this really strong Reels engagement moving through the overall user base? Last, we used sentiment analysis to see how the analyst call sounded about specific topics. About investments, the sentiment is 88% positive. About costs, the sentiment is 75% positive. About growth, the sentiment is 55% positive. About outlook, the sentiment is 66.7% positive.
Qualcomm announced results on April 27, 2022. Interesting facts picked up from the call. We had record revenues of $6.3 billion, driven by continued traction with leading smartphone OEMs such as Samsung, Xiaomi, Oppo, Vivo and Honor, where Snapdragon continues to be the mobile technology platform of choice for premium and high-tier Android. As you can see from our results, we delivered record revenues of $11.2 billion in non-GAAP earnings of $3.21 per share, representing year-over-year growth of 41% and 69% respectively, both exceeding the high end of our guidance in QCT. Our QCT handset revenues are on track to grow by greater than 50% in fiscal 22, and we are well positioned for fiscal 23 as we continue to benefit from increased processor content and share gains while we strengthen our mobile leadership. Our automotive design win pipeline is now over $16 billion, up more than $3 billion since fiscal Q1. IoT revenues grew 61% year-over-year with strong growth across all three categories of consumer, edge networking and industrial RF. I think Windows 11, as I mentioned before, is for the first time you have full support, including 64-bit emulation on ARM is the first time that you actually have a platform which is ready for commercial and enterprise deployment. Here are some of the questions that were asked during the earnings call, to have a better idea of the discussions that were happening. Christiana, are you thinking about the content and share expansion at Samsung as being sustainable and how would the RF attach on that expansion and share at Samsung trending? Is there any outlook you can give us either qualitative or quantitative for the rest of the business into September? And I wonder, has the shortage contributed to the pricing and margin strength that you've seen in any way as that shortage eases? But how are you thinking about the second half in terms of the kind of pulls there to grow revenue units share or more content? Last, we used sentiment analysis to see how the analyst call sounded about specific topics. About investments, sentiment SS 67% positive. About growth, sentiment is 80% positive. About outlook, sentiment is 75% negative.
I hope you found today's updates helpful. If you want to learn how to build your own algorithms, you can check our free YouTube channel where we post hands-on courses about how to build them, or get the book that is looking at multiple types of investment algorithms, or feel free to check our small group customized lessons for something more personalized.